Hello all, I hope you're doing well today. I've been watching the fallout to Robert Jenrick's statements that he didn't see many white faces at all in an area of Birmingham, Handsworth, I think it was. And it's very interesting this, because as we explored yesterday, it's clear that Jenrick is trying to appeal to the anti-immigration sentiment at the moment. He's trying to win over elements of the right wing, maybe even the centrists they're going to reform. However, he did clarify his statements by, of course, saying he was talking about integration, and this is a classic Tory move. They make sort of right-wing statements that are right on the line to try and get that cross-appeal between the sort of centrists and the right. However, it's still rooted in a liberal conformity, really, i.e., I'm only talking about integration. That means he's got plausible deniability to the Liberals down the line. But what I really want to drill down on is the implication of Jenrick's statement, especially how he clarified it by speaking about integration, because that begs the question, well, what do you mean, Robert, about integration? What is the correct level of white faces? Should it be 25% white folks, 25% black, 25% Pakistani, and 25% everyone else? Should there be 50% of white Brits and 50% of everyone else? Now, you're not really supposed to think on these questions because they undermine the liberal view of things. You're supposed to go along with what they tell you, that Robert Jenrick is evil, that diversity is our strength, and so on. And the big one recently is that we need to integrate, apparently. This is quite odd, obviously, after having decades of forced multiculturalism and mass immigration that nobody asked for, and then being told that we have to integrate into the country they've created that, again, nobody asked for, and then they pearl clutch and say, oh my, why is nationalism and identity on the rise? Yeah, it's a real head-scratcher, that one, isn't it? However, the core point I'm making here is clearly the Liberal regime indicates that it's seen as very, very bad, very morally bankrupt to notice that certain areas of the UK have very few white faces. But it's also noticeable how this isn't the same across the board, as you might expect if the aim is to move towards quote-unquote equality. Konstantin Kisin made an interesting point here on X, speaking about the BBC presenter Nihal Arthanayake. I believe that's how you pronounce his name. He's Sri Lankan, I think. You may remember a year or two ago, he said working at the BBC and seeing so many white people was affecting his mental health and making him ill. Now, sometimes you can't quite believe that the liberal types actually say these sorts of things, but he really did say that. And also what was very notable is he got a lot of sympathetic and sentimental coverage in the liberal media. Poor you, we're going to work more on diversity. We all understand how horrible it is to live around white people and all that sort of stuff. Funnily enough, they never seem to go to the countries where there aren't many white people, but that's another video. What I want to drill down on is this dynamic that if a politician notices that there are very few white faces in a given area, that's of course evil. But if a BBC presenter who comes from a Sri Lankan background notices there are, quote, too many, that's wonderful and brave. Now, we can break down what's being inferred here via the famous Aristotelian syllogism. He famously used premises to define a conclusion, most notably, all humans are mortal, with a minor premise, Socrates is a human, and the conclusion, therefore, Socrates is mortal. This has become a famous tool in logic to discover truths without the use of empirical evidence, and we can apply it to what we're exploring here. In this context, it would be something like the major premise, noticing too many brown faces and too few white is bad, while noticing too many white faces and too few brown is good. The conclusion, therefore, white is bad, brown is good. Now, this logical conclusion maps on perfectly to what we see from the liberal media. Here's a piece from the BBC a while ago. Rural racism in Dorset. Why is our countryside 98% white? Again, too many white faces equals bad. And as we know, when things are the other way around, the liberal regime doesn't seem to mind at all. Newham in London is 15% white British, probably lower now as well. Have you ever seen the BBC, or anyone else for that matter, complaining about that? Similarly, Alum Rock in Birmingham, heavy Muslim area, massively overrepresented. Have you ever heard the BBC or the liberal media say integration isn't working out there? And when it comes to things such as the England football team having massive overrepresentation for black folks, given their 4% of the country, that's seen as a good thing. So in essence, the point is clear. The online adage that diversity basically means non-white is essentially true. After all, you never see the Liberal regime complaining about an area that's totally non-white, and if someone said we need some white people here for diversity reasons, they would be called sick and evil. Now, we know the sort of responses you'd get from the Liberals here. Well, the white Brits are still so dominant, you're still 80% of the nation. I don't really buy that, I think it's closer to 70, but anyway, that's what they'd say. Minority groups, they need their own town so they can feel at home. Of course, never works that way for us. On top of that, you'd get the neo-Marxist stuff, the racial power politics, the white privilege is so endemic that we need to represent other groups or over-represent them, they need the exposure and so on. Now, there's been about 1 million YouTube videos breaking down the neo-Marxist ideology, so I don't think we need to get lost in that. The core question I want to come back to is, what is the ideal amount of white faces to the liberal system? I mean, the liberal system can't say such a question doesn't matter, as it clearly does to them, because they complain there are too many white people in certain areas. And they can't say why care, as they clearly care, as they're always writing articles and complaining about it. So what is the correct number? 70% of the nation? 50%? 25%? 5%? Now, of course, they would never give a number because they prefer to think in this amorphous blob of humanity. To present a number would make the diversity experiment real and put actual accountability on their heads. The reality is that the utopian perfect diversity levels will never be reached because they don't know what they fundamentally are. What they know is an ideology. It's all on the one side a luxury liberal belief, a fantasy that doesn't make any logical sense. But I do think the delusional liberal bubble is getting smaller and smaller. For decades we've been told by the liberal elite that diversity is absolutely wonderful, but it belongs in your backyard, not mine. Now, the ruling liberal regime will not let go of this utopian dream. One, because it's completely tied to the global market and they're getting money from it. And two, because it feeds into their idea of being a superior human being. However, more and more people are noticing that there is a strong flavour of resentment and revenge coming from many of our new arrivals, as well as people themselves feeling their own identity needs to be protected. Now, I still don't believe the liberal elite have truly realised what's waking up in Britain and across the continent. Many Europeans are now realising that if we don't start to draw a line in the sand, that's it. It's pretty much over for the European story. It's ended not with a bang, but with a whimper. We'd be wise to remember that there are 0 examples of a healthy, multicultural, functioning society. The only examples the liberal system can ever point to are those in which there's been a strong group which has been ruling the other groups. People have also noticed that the political class aren't going to do anything about it. Number one, because they just serve the globalist system themselves. And number two, well, because we're not thinking on a high enough level. Elections aren't going to fix this. I personally believe the only way forward now is a pan-European agreement with new leaders who state very firmly, we don't want to be made a minority in our own homeland. This is the only place we've got, and it's not evil to want such a thing. And when doing this, I don't think you have to be hateful or mean to anybody. As I've said myself, I don't blame many of the migrants for coming here and wanting a better life. I blame our rulers for the system that they've built. I think at this point we have to realise that the Europeans are a small group, globally speaking, and we've achieved amazing things in human history, but we don't have anywhere else to go. By all means, we can seek peace with different groups, but it's wise in life, especially in the context of human history, I believe, to have your own front door. To my mind, we're getting closer and closer to the final hour, and we don't have time for nicey liberal individualism anymore, or we just watch TV and get on with our own lives. We really are looking at an epochal age coming up. As always, these are just my thoughts. Do let me know what you think down below, and do consider subscribing to the channel if you're new.